Welcome. This is Concession Impressions, a show where we watch a movie, and now we're in a car, and we're going to discuss this film we just watched, which, if you couldn't tell from either that bleh or from
from the trailer.
Or from the trailer, if you haven't watched the trailer, or, if you've watched the trailer or seen the movie, which, hopefully you possibly have. This is our review for The Invitation 2022. I need to make that clarification because there is another film that came out, I want to say, a few years ago. That's right, it did come out a few years ago. I don't remember the date, but it is also called The Invitation, and it is also a thriller, but it's a totally different film. So this is the 2022 The Invitation, and if you couldn't tell, it is a vampire film, a horror vampire film. And I'm using air quotes in my voice because...
On the horror or the vampire?
Yes.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in. I have very few points. It's like very big things, but it's not much to say about them. So I'm just going to go into my spoil-free review.
Don't see it.
To see it. Should you see it or you shouldn't see it? I'm going to say don't see it. Just skip it.
I'm going to say if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the entire movie.
Yeah, pretty much.
Except for like the last 5 minutes.
Which is going to be pretty much implied through the trailer.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell what's going to happen afterwards.
And it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I will say also, and maybe this should be like a totally different show or something like that, where we just talk about trailers or something like that, but, the trailer also was kind of terrible.
It was bad, but I think it makes the whole movie worse, because I think if you didn't know going in that this was a vampire movie, you could maybe be convinced that it's like a romantic, creepy horror movie, and then the vampires kind of come in second and as like a nice surprise, and maybe that makes the movie a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, because it was marketed as a vampire movie. Like, when you watch the trailer, you're like, oh, okay, they're vampires. But then it's like...
It absolutely spoils every single surprise.
Yeah.
Right down to, like, literally the old people in the trailer, like, flipping. Like, in every surprise. And there's not that many surprises in this movie to begin with.
Yeah, they just pretty much skip the middle part where they just
where nothing happens.
Where they just kind of
and they have
talk to these characters and, like, kind of, have them talk to each other a little bit. But pretty much the entire film, just watch the trailer and you can kind of get the entire gist of this film from beginning to end, literally. Because this trailer is a summary of the film. It's like a video summary of the film.
Basically. We'll get into it in more of the spoilery part of this review.
If you haven't seen the trailer, we've pretty much spoiled it already because it's a vampire film. But yeah, I guess it's pretty straightforward. I don't think see it. Watch the trailer.
Nah.
Don't watch the film.
I don't even think watch the trailer. It's not worth it. Nothing about this movie is...
the trailer's not good by any means.
Yeah.
But, if you're thinking, oh, should I watch this film? Or if you're thinking, I'm going to go spend money to watch this film, save your money, watch the trailer, be like, wow, this trailer is really bad, and then think, and trust us, that when we tell you that the movie is
go watch something else.
Yeah, go watch it. So you know what? Go watch The Invitation that came out a few years ago. That is a great film.
I've not seen it.
Oh, really? That's gonna be maybe like a little bit homework for you or something.
Okay, I will add it to my list.
2015. Go watch the 2015 The Invitation. It is a great thriller. You said you love thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great thriller where the suspense builds and then you can never... It's kind of... The trailer's done well too because you never know what's going on in the trailer even. It's just like kind of suspenseful. And then the movie itself is just like you're always thinking like something eerie is happening, but what's happening? And then it kind of just all escalates. So
cool.
It's a great little movie. I think it's great. So go watch that film. Don't watch this film. 2015 Invitation. Don't watch the 2022 Invitation.
The point you made about the trailer where it gives you just a tone, it doesn't give you actual plot points. That's what trailers should do. They shouldn't lie about the tone either. That's another problem that a lot of modern trailers have, is they try to imply that everything is a thriller when it's not.
Like the 3,000 Years of Longing.
Like 3,000 Years of Longing, yeah. Whereas this movie is actually a thriller in some aspect, although I think it's really actually... Well, I think the director didn't didn't know what they had, which is actually a gothic romance.
Yeah, so I think I want to let's just pause that. I think the directing and those things I want to talk about a little more, but maybe we should just save it for spoilers because I don't want to
I think we're already there.
Okay, well, welcome to the spoil zone.
Welcome to the spoil zone.
Now we're gonna be spoilers. This is your warning from now on. It's spoilers.
We've already told them not to see it.
Yeah, I mean that's true.
Just listen to this.
Just listen to this. Yeah, exactly. Don't even watch it. Listen to this. We're gonna spoil it for you, but it's totally fine because you're thankful to us.
You'll be much more entertained by us shit talking this film than by actually watching it.
Yeah. So going off the directing, I think I was keep thinking like it's either the directing, the editing, the cinematography, or just like a mixture of everything that just felt really bad.
I think the directing was bland and featureless. And I noticed, I did a brief IMDb scan of the director, and she's done one movie, a few shorts, and then some TV work.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like TV level directing, where you're not really inserting your own perspective from a director, but like it's adequate. Yeah. You know, you understand what's happening in the scene. I think the major problem is that a vast majority of this movie is people having vapid conversations about nothing.
Yeah. I will say that one thing about the writing is that it works, but again, if you go, like you said earlier, that if you go into it with the mindset that you have no idea what this film is about, it kind of works. Like the dialogue is not the best, but like in terms of the setup of like kind of building up to something and then kind of revealing it and having like a final act of like, oh, now everything's kind of out of the bag, you know, deal with it. It kind of feels like they were trying to write the next Get Out, trying to make the next Get Out, you know, but it just kind of missed. It kind of didn't, it failed everywhere. I think the writing was kind of not the best in like dialogue aspects and in a lot of other points, characters. Other than that, like I think the directing, like you said, was a little bit bland. The editing was just really choppy and really weird. Like they're like trying to have some fun with it, but then again, like not in a good way. Like it didn't really come out well. I especially would want to say that like there's not much action in it because it's like the first, I don't know how long the film was actually. I kind of
It's only like an hour and a half, but it feels way long.
I was thinking like, is this film like 2-3 hours? I was surprised we got out and I was like, oh, it's only 10 o'clock.
Yeah, literally the action takes place in the last like 20 minutes of the movie, and that goes by really quickly.
It's only like one scene of action, one real scene of action, and it's like super choppy, and I couldn't tell what was happening at all, and it was not interesting. It was like the worst thing ever. I think there was like 4 cuts for one slap.
Yeah, that's
and I was like, how can you mess up a slap? And that was a fighting, but then the editing for the dialogue as well was just like they would always cut away at like the weirdest moments, and they would like kind of cut the dialogue in weirdly. Like they just kind of were, I don't know if they were messing up on set or if they just like trying to shoehorn in all these lines after the fact. Or
I
what
bet
was
the
going
dialogue
on.
was a lot longer. Like the scenes were a lot longer, but when they got into the editing room, they realized that for most of this, the characters aren't actually saying anything with their dialogue. They're just having like pleasant conversations, which is not what movie dialogue is supposed to be. Like that, you don't see small talk in movies. Even when they're having quote unquote small talk style conversations in a good movie, you're still learning something about the character, or you're getting tonal information. You're getting something. In this movie, like the first 2/3 is basically like supposed to be a romance, like a almost like sort of very poorly done Jane Austen style romance, and it is so boring. Nothing happens, and the characters are just pleasantly talking with each other, except for there's a couple of bridesmaids who are kind of bitchy. That's it. Like that's the whole conflict in the first, at least half of the movie.
Yeah, and there are like little sprinkles of horror in there, but it wasn't really.
It's not even horror. It's just uneasiness.
Yeah. And I was thinking like in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, this scene, she's sitting there, and then she turns the light on, and then it turns out it was nothing, but it was like holding on her face. I was like, oh, she's gonna go to turn off the light, and somebody's gonna scare her or something. But like every time, there's just like
it's just bad jump scares that you could see coming from a mile away.
But even then, there was like so many opportunities. I was thinking like, oh, they're gonna put a jump scare here, and they just don't do anything, or they would just like cut away away and they'll just like...
Well, I don't think you have to do... I think it's actually good to sprinkle in some fake outs in general, but the problem is that we already know every single jump scare that comes in this movie because they were all in the fucking trailer.
That's true, yeah.
And then the only scene that like kind of worked for me was the spa scene with the nail, which also was spoiled.
Actually, that is true. It was spoiled, and it was the only one that I felt the tension, and I think that was probably the best edited scene.
Yes, I agree.
And it was the most intense scene, for sure.
I literally was, like, cringing, because, like, I don't know why, but, like, things like paper cuts, for some reason, make me, like, wince more than, like, somebody getting full-on stabbed. I don't know why.
It feels more real. Because, like, you would actually get a paper cut, but you wouldn't get beheaded. I mean, you could get beheaded, but you won't remember it.
Maybe it is as simple as I just know what that feels like.
You're dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were not going to get impaled, you know. But, yeah, and also you know how it gets, or, like, a hangnail, or, like, cutting your finger or something like that. Like, you probably have a lot of memories that are connected to that experience.
And I don't know if have you seen the movie Titan?
No.
It came out in the last year or so. It's this French movie it's a French horror body horror film with a lot of scenes that were kind of like that. It won, I think, the Palme d'Or Cannes this year or last year. But it has a lot of scenes where you're just wincing because the character is doing these horrifying things to people's bodies in a way that is so visceral. So like that scene in this movie with the cuticle cutting and the cut on the finger was sort of reminiscent of that movie for me, and I thought that was nice. But that's really like the only scene in this entire movie that had any kind of heightened anything for me. The rest of the movie is so predictable, was either spoiled by the trailer or was, you know, just nothing happening, which is the worst criminal thing you could say about a movie, is that nothing is happening.
Yeah. It also kind of just a big build up to nothing even happening in the end either. Like so there's like 3 wives, or she's becoming the 3rd wife
which the lore we only get like in the last 20 minutes of the movie too.
Yeah, like, and I guess it doesn't really make sense. You're just like, oh, believe it. This is how it works. It's vampire magic.
Yeah.
Supposedly once they're all married, all the families are connected, then they all can be, because I was also thinking like they're all immortal then, right? Is that what it is?
It's a play on Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh,
with his multiple wives.
I mean, but I never read Dracula, so
yeah.
Sorry.
Not.
I mean,
I love gothic horror.
Is all the vampire or like all the families also becoming mortal? I thought it was just like Dracula.
Yes, that's what they implied.
I mean, in this film, yeah. I mean, I guess, okay. Yeah.
In the original, there's no families.
Okay.
There's just, which is another movie, also great, you know, much better vampire movie than this. I don't know. I think the problem for me with this movie is that it's either intentionally or unintentionally, it's not really clear, referencing a ton of gothic horror as well as gothic romance. And both of those are great, awesome things to reference, but it does so in such a poorly done way, and that it's just so boring the entire time, and the only thing that's actually gothic about it, and this isn't even really gothic about it because it's not actually a gothic estate, is the estate. This like giant mansion,
and I was actually thinking
it's not gothic.
It's not. It's like, I don't know too much about European, you know, architecture.
It is Edwardian.
Oh, throwing these words out. Okay. So I will say that was my favorite part of the film, was like the set and like the set design, but like I'm grasping at straws here. Like it's literally, I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool house, like, you know, European. I was thinking Victorian, but I know nothing about it, so that's the only word that came to my mind. But like, it's like, oh, this is a cool house, cool estate, you know, like it felt like Downton Abbey kind of like
very Downton Abbey
vibes, and I was like, this is kind of like cool house. Yeah, I guess this movie is kind of like Downton Abbey, except with vampires.
Yeah.
The first 3 acts I haven't really watched much of Downton Abbey either.
I've not watched any of Downton Abbey, but I'm vaguely familiar.
It feels like it, you know, like British people being British.
Right. I'm curious if this was actually written by a British person. It doesn't feel like super British to me, other than like a couple of like one-liners that are like oh, this is somebody's watched a lot of British
they
TV.
They binge watched all of
Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like there were a couple of one-off lines. Most of the movie feels pretty devoid of any real cultural specificity. Even at the end, towards the end, when he's talking about his heritage of being a Strigoi, which is a Eastern European version of the vampire. I don't know why I know that, but is it doesn't really feel like it because there's no other Eastern European references other than maybe I think the first wife, the older wife, is kind of maybe Eastern European-esque.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, and also they referenced Lad the Impaler, and also some fun things. There was a couple of things that, like, I thought they were going to make a joke out of or mention the eye patch wearing Alexander Elder. I think he's clearly the boy that had his eye plucked out by a shrike.
Oh, maybe.
That they mentioned earlier. That never comes back into play, really. It's just a little detail that I kind of noticed. I kind of noticed.
Nice. Okay, actually, going off that, again, like, that's what made me think of, like, Get Out, right? Because it was, like, these little, like, things, like, oh, they got, Grandpa used to, he almost won at the Olympics, just remember that,
right.
And then Grandpa's the guy who's running. Like, there's, like, little things that are just, like, oh, okay, like, it seems like they're trying to build up to something, like, kind of how Get Out was, like, oh, there's something weird about this family.
Right.
And then it just, like, oh, they're trying to steal people's brains and put them into other people's bodies. And the twist in this one is, oh, they're trying to lure her in to marry him to unionize all their families to become immortal.
I think where it becomes so sloppy in this movie, whereas it really, I think some of those mystery elements really work in Get Out, is because Get Out's message is so specific. And it's all about the appropriation of black culture. That's what it's about. And black
it felt like they were
ideas.
doing a little bit of that in this film.
But yes.
With the main character, like, some of her lines were like kind of addressing that a little bit, but idea wasn't clear and it wasn't a strong message. And they didn't really try to reinforce it
at all on any particular subject, and that's sloppy writing. And horror, I think in particular, demands that you have a message for it to be good horror, because, like, I personally think there's a difference between a horror film, a scary film, and a thriller, and I think oftentimes people kind of combine all those into one and they don't really distinguish between them properly. But horror specifically for me is about this idea of a thing that you find terrible and horrific that you can't change. And it's that, like, feeling that you get when you see something so awful but you can't change it. That's what horror is. Whereas, like, a scary movie is, like, it's just scary. You get jump scares, you get surprise, you get a fear for your life.
And this doesn't really do any of those things.
And then the thrillers where you have stakes, and
there was stakes in this film.
There were a couple of stakes where you have stakes for your main character and you're invested in the journey and you want to see a conclusion that is good for your main character. So where I was going with this is that this movie is taking all these random little potshot one-liners at classism, at sexism, at racism, at whatever, and making, like, little brief one-offs but not building to any big conclusion. And that is such a mistake with horror. Horror demands focus. And so, like, if they had focused on racism and colonialism, that could have been a really interesting movie. I think they could have I was thinking in the middle of this movie, like, how interesting would it be with this black character having all of these white relatives, and if they hadn't set it in Europe, maybe they set it in a plantation in America, and they could talk about, like, the slave trade and have kind of a blaxploitation version of a vampire killer.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything would have been better than what we saw.
Honestly, but I think it would have been an interesting discussion about kind of the ill wills of American imperialism, well, not American imperialism, American slavery and American racism, and how this entire family is now dependent on this heir that is a long-lost family member from somebody who was, like, a slave that was raped by their white master.
Yeah, which they're like, they mentioned once, and then they're like, haha, don't worry about it.
Right, and so, like, I think that could have been a more interesting version, or I think without completely changing the setting and some of the other things, I think they could have made this a really interesting commentary about women, because they have all these women throughout different periods in this movie that are vampires. But they're trying to add her to their collective, basically. And that could have been a really interesting version of this movie, too, is discussing the long-lasting damages of sexism and historical sexism and the complicity of women in sexism and the complicity of class and whatever. You know, like, you could have gone in a much more interesting direction with this than this, like, weird mix of all these different things that doesn't really add up to anything, and it's kind of weirdly like a romance.
Yeah, I will say his smile was pretty nice, but I don't know. Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's so many things that could have been better. I mean, just with technical stuff too, with the editing, with the filming, like the cinematography, the directing, I think I said that already, the editing, like every little aspect could have been better. The writing, of course, like I said, there's so many points that just didn't make sense or structurally didn't make sense. And then also the story itself wasn't really that good of a story.
I mean, they have a whirlwind romance in a course of like 2.5 days.
And that's what I was thinking was they met, and then the next day she's like, oh, let's get married. Like, you literally know this guy for like less than 24 hours. What's going on? Like, it kind of would be like, oh, you're gonna spend a week here, and maybe like if they were like, oh, I kind of make sense that they've known each other for this week.
Mm-hmm.
She meets him, she sees him the next night, and then they like fall in love. That like within one dance and some fireworks.
And it's like, it is so like straightforward. There's something about it that is just so trite and overdone. Like the fireworks scene, I was like, oh my god, this, like, it's not even romantic anymore. It feels like I'm being like manipulated into thinking it's romantic.
Like, hello, 50 Shades of Grey already did this like 10 years ago.
Yeah. And it's a worse romance than 50 Shades of Grey, because at least that is a romance that takes place over a little period of time, and they don't immediately like each other.
Yeah.
Like this one, they literally have one negative confrontation at the beginning, which is like a kind of a classism discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately after that, she's like, oh, he's so hot.
Yeah.
And like that's, from then on, that's all that matters, is he's hot, and now they're sleeping together. And oh, do you want to get married? Sure. I was joking, but sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, they use that several times. There's like a running gag where she says something and then it's not perceived as a joke because it's said seriously. And then she's like, nope, I was joking. And then the vampires are like, oh, okay, I get it.
Gotcha. Like, sure, I don't care. You said it. You said the words. That's all I need to know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Really quickly, I'm just going to quickly just spoil the biggest things, and then let's just go into our final discussion. Yes, there's total in this movie. There's the main, like, vampire Nosferatu, his two vampiric wives.
What is his name even? I can't even remember. I can't remember any of their names.
I don't remember any of their names either. I don't remember the main character's name.
Jesse.
Oh, Evie. I remember Evie because of Pokemon.
Oh, my cousin Evie. Right.
Yeah. So
that's another clear sign, if you can't remember the characters' names, that they had terrible introductions and they are not meaningful.
The guy was Walt. I remember that.
Walt, right.
That's just true. Okay. Other than that, I don't remember any other character.
What vampire is named Walt?
I don't know. Maybe it's Vault Vampire. Bleh.
Is it like a play on words of Vladimir?
I don't know. The
Does
Impaler.
Vladimir and Walter have the same root? I don't know. It's so
I don't know.
weird.
Someone tell us.
Because he does say he's Vladimir the Impaler at one point.
Yeah.
Or he
So
implies it.
he's a
Anyway.
vampire. He's been alive forever. He has two wives who he turns into vampires. The main character, he turns into a vampire at one point at the end, and then she retaliates, and then the other two wives fight each other and impale each other.
Mm-hmm.
They die, and then she kills the main guy, the Walter, first by stabbing him and then throwing him into a fire, and then she becomes human again, and she lives happily ever after and becomes like a weird vampire hunt or family hunter or something.
I don't understand the end. Like
The end.
Like it's almost like a post-credit scene.
Yeah.
Of her like going after Oliver. He's the only character that I remember because I think he had the best character introduction. Oliver, because his is actually quite creepy.
And then because like she shows up and it's like, oh, I'm gonna beat him up, and like we're gonna go around now and just beat up everyone in this family, which is like, what is this? Like, it's setting up a sequel that she's gonna be like, it's gonna be an action sequel where.
And he implies that he's still immortal. When he enters the room, he's like on the phone and he says, oh, they're just mortals.
Yeah.
Which I thought as soon as Walt dies, all the power goes away. So that doesn't make much sense either.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things didn't make sense, and
it's just very sloppily written.
What an ending! Like, why? That's like a total change of like
it
pace
has
for
nothing
the
to
entire
do with her
film.
life at all. It's just
It was like 2 weeks later. Oh, okay. How is her life now after this entire incident?
she got a haircut.
She got a haircut, and now she's beating up people with baseball bats, and there we go.
It would have made more sense if they had implied that she has no direction in life, but they imply that she like wants to be an artist, which never really comes up. I also think like if we were going to go go that route, I would have made her an art historian, because that would have been a more interesting route for me personally.
Yeah.
Especially because they're like this family of art collectors, and that's the first thing she notices when she enters their house is all these like famous pieces of artwork.
Yeah.
Which could have given her some like more interesting subtle clues. Instead, they use it to like she sees some random statue in the courtyard, and she's like, "Oh, is this 18th century or something?" So, which is like such trite, pointless dialogue. It means nothing. Like, oh, like what's the point of this? It doesn't tell her anything. It doesn't tell us anything about the story other than that, oh, he has some old artwork in his old ass mansion.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't
which
really...
we already knew.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to slightly hint that he's a vampire, but then it's like he just has old stuff.
But like, what is hinting at a vampire about Eve statue with a snake and an apple, about which is all about knowledge and also about desire and sexuality. None of that has that much directly to do with a vampire story. I don't know, especially when he's supposed to be like this Eastern European Strigoi.
Yeah.
And also, he has such modern values throughout the entire film until the very last second when he's like, "Oh, a person of your status, I was going to raise you up."
Yeah.
Which also is like, I don't know, stupid. Just bad, lazy writing.
It definitely was. Well, there you have it. Last thoughts before we get... Or do you want to go to review last thought?
So I just have one last thing to say about the structure of the film that I think was a bad mistake on their part, was introducing us to the creepy way that previous Alexander wife killed herself in such an obviously like vampiric way.
Yeah.
If they had, like, this movie, if they just withheld the information that this was a vampire film and moved that scene to a later scene and made it all about like this family who's hunting down Alexander women and this like creepy thing that this person has to marry an Alexander woman for some reason, and the mystery of all of that, I think this movie could have been so much better. And I think if they had played it up that like, oh, this is her old room that she was in, and there's like little clues around the room, which wouldn't have been a big add to the budget. They spent money on this room. It is very well decorated, but they could have added some like story touches, like maybe she finds something etched into the bed frame, or she finds a diary hidden between some slats in the floor, or she finds some mysterious objects that are in a painting, like a ring or something, and she for some reason really likes it, and then she sees that ring on one of the other wives' fingers or something. Like, I don't know, something to add to the mystery and the like, oh, she's like, they're not telling her something, where we don't really get any of that throughout the entire film. She is the most patsy of all characters I've ever seen. She just goes along with everything.
Yeah, she does.
Until the very last second when they're like, mask off, we're vampires, and now we're getting married. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, she never suspects a damn thing. Except for her best friend is telling her, like, don't trust a man with a goatee, which never comes into play at all.
Yeah. Even, like, the small things where she's, like, hearing noises, or, like, she's like, oh, what's happening in that weird cabin that noises are coming from? Oh, it's just an ice room. Oh, okay. And then I'm not gonna do anything about it. Oh, like, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. And I also want to say that, just as you're saying that, just made me think of, is that their powers didn't make sense, but then like there are so many points that like all the jump scares are like the vampires, right?
Yeah. Also, it's not clear who is a vampire and who isn't.
Well, I thought that it was just them three or them four at the end.
I think it's just them three, but then and her, the main character Evie. But then also it seems like maybe some of the people, like, oh, maybe they had lived very long, which doesn't really make sense with the genetics thing.
Yeah, a lot of things don't make sense. But okay, but like they were crawling on walls and like they were teleporting almost, because you'll see them and then she'll turn on a light and they'll disappear, and all these like weird things, right? But when they fight at the end, they're just like, snarling at each other, claws. And they just scratch each other. It's like, what's going on with like all of this like things that they're hinting at, and they're just like slapping each other in the end, and then just an easy, oh, I'm gonna take a stake out and just stab you instantly.
That's another thing. They did not properly set up the turn of the younger wife. There's clearly like a 1920s wife, the blonde one.
Yeah.
Like, like she in the end decides, oh, I'm actually going to be good now, and I'm going to self-sacrifice and kill the other wife.
Yeah.
Like, that comes out of nowhere. Like, we kind of suspect that she's, like, maybe not as awful as the older wife, but at no point do we suspect that she actually regrets being a vampire or is willing to turn and lose her immortal status. It's quite clear that she likes being an immortal vampire in every other scene until she decides, oh, I'm going to turn and save our hero, our heroine.
Yeah. I think it could have been, I think it would have been better if she accidentally killed the oldest wife, being like, or something. Like,
or if there was more like if they had another scene where they were disagreeing and like she was fed up of being like the underappreciated wife.
Yeah. Like you said, I think they probably maybe filmed extra stuff, but they just cut it out because it was so boring. But I think that would have been interesting, or at least would have helped the story a little bit, or at least the ending a little bit more. But yeah, I digress. Let's get into the last thing.
Last thing.
Okay.
This is directed by a woman, and so we are finally reaching a level of parody that women can also direct mediocre vampire films as well.
All right. Well,
we're getting there.
On
equality.
Yeah. So on that note, what's your concession rating for this concession impression?
It's gonna have to be a Raisinette for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a Raisinette. I think hands down. Is it our first time
agreeing?
Agreeing, and it's the lowest rated film we've done so far.
Yeah, for both of our ratings. Yeah.
Yeah. So Raisinettes through and through.
Abysmal film.
Yeah.
Total waste of time.
Yeah, I agree completely. So there you have it. That's a quick ending right there. Just straight up, it's terrible. It's a Raisinette. I hope you can understand why it's Raisinette through listening to this episode, and I hope we avoid you having to watch this film.
Watch the trailer and then go watch The Invitation from 2015.
Yeah, you too, Chase, because you haven't watched it either.
Me too. Yeah.
So yeah, that's our concession impression for the film The Invitation 2022. That's it. See y'all next time. I will say also, we also created an Instagram, so check us out on Instagram at Film Cookbook. Also on Twitter at Film Cookbook. Follow us. Let us know what you think of the podcast, of the movie, whatever, how your day's going, how your week's going. And we'll see you next week on the next concession impression. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Concession Impressions. The show is hosted and produced by Charles Helbeck and myself, Michelangelo White. Music in this episode was created by Joe Part. The show's logo and the editing was done by the marvelous Miss Yumi White. Let us know, again, what your thoughts are at Twitter or on Instagram, where you can find us at Film Cookbook. We're excited to hear your thoughts and, to get to know everyone more. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.